Hello and welcome everyone to today's talk highlighting the research on best leadership style for effective conflict management in healthcare. I am Ghazala Yasmin. Please use the QR code to subscribe and access this presentation from YouTube channel. The agenda of today's talk will include introduction of the topic along with purpose and significance, and I will highlight the theoretical lens and methodology used to get finding the result. And the end will conclude this talk along with some recommendations and future research. Conflicts range from minor disagreement to major disputes. It happens in all aspects of life, and healthcare is no exception. Managing conflict is a time consuming process, but it is essential for healthcare leaders due to its high impact on patient care. Scholars debated whether organizations and their leaders should approach conflict by trying to manage or resolve it. Regardless of it, the problem with conflict is not its existence, but rather its proper management. Conflicts are not adequately managed for various reasons, which include leadership's poor communication and lack of awareness of others' emotion. That is why this dissertation is grounded in the proposition that a people-oriented leadership style is essential. In any working environment, conflict mostly occurs due to personal or organizational differences. So it is important to understand conflict, its dynamics, and its consequences for organizations and organizational members. Hence, the purpose of this dissertation is to study the best leadership style to manage conflict in healthcare. And the significance of this dissertation to management practice is that it will offer recommendations to healthcare professionals regarding the importance of an effective leadership style to manage conflict. The research question guiding this dissertation is based on some propositions. These propositions underpin the research question and will be assessed in the systematic review. The research question was developed using the SAMO framework, in which the context is the conflict in healthcare industry. The interventions are conflict management strategies and influential leadership style to manage conflicts. Mechanism is a systematic thematic review, and the outcome of this dissertation will provide recommendations to healthcare professionals for effective conflict management. To better understand the role of leadership style in conflict management, it is important to understand the conflict cycle. The conflict cycle, organizational learning theory, and dual concern model for handling conflict altogether provide the platform to generate the conceptual framework for this study. In brief, conflict cycle has four components that explain causes, the core process, outcomes of conflicts, along with its feedback. Organizational learning theory have four components as well, which is based on governing variables, action strategy, consequences, and the feedback. The feedback have a very important role in organizational learning. There are two types of learning, which is single loop learning and the double loop learning based on the feedback. The single loop learning is in which the organizations only change their strategies to bring their desired results, but sometimes only changing strategy doesn't work to bring the desired outcomes. In that case, organizations bring a structural change and they change their governing variables and action strategies to bring the desired results. So that process is called double loop learning. But there is another very important tool for this study is a dual concern model, which is developed by keeping in mind the concern for self and concern for others. This model provides 5 conflict management styles, which are integrating, obliging, compromising, dominating, and avoiding. As mentioned earlier, the conflict cycle, the organizational learning theory, and the dual concern model altogether provide the platform to develop this conceptual framework. This conceptual framework displays the causes, the core process, and preferred outcomes along with the feedback mechanism. The core process is critical in this conceptual framework as it involves multiple interventions, including the leadership style, leadership attributes, for example, emotional intelligence and communication, and conflict management styles. Organizations can achieve preferred outcomes, but they are highly dependent on a leadership style. Feedback is essential to complete the cycle of conflict management, which leads towards the organizational learning process and complete the cycle of organization's effective conflict management process as a whole. The systematic review approach was used to identify the relevant literature, conduct critical reviews, summarize and analyze the results, identify the themes, and provide recommendations accordingly. A database search was conducted using UMJC library resources and exploring different databases. 11 databases were searched for relevant material. The search string for this systematic review was conducted with keywords from the research questions, mainly leadership style and conflict management. The table here highlights the links between the search string and this research question. Trends in conflict management in healthcare over the last 10 years were analyzed using the Scopus analysis tool. And the graph displays an increasing number of published documents in the last 10 years on conflict management in healthcare. The original search string generated 511 articles, narrowed it down to 49 articles after applying the inclusion and exclusion criteria mentioned in the table below. 5 articles were added to this number by drawing an seminal work in healthcare and conflict management that fell outside the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and that raised the total number of articles for quality appraisal to 54. Both Topopis and weight of evidence were used for quality appraisal. Articles were first critically reviewed using the Topopis criteria, and points were assigned for each component ranging from 1 to 3, for 1 being the some standard mat and 3 as the highest standard. Scores were then aggregated to get the final Topopis score. Articles were also rated using the weight of evidence criteria of high, medium, and low, and the relationship between the weight of evidence and Topopis is displayed here as an example with the 5 articles. The approach used to synthesize the articles was thematic synthesis. Codes were generated by using the Atlas TI. Each article was downloaded in Atlas TI and analyzed for standard codes using the word cloud tool. In the coding process, both an inductive and deductive approach was used to create codes. The coding process was completed in 2 cycles. In the first cycle, 106 codes were created, and in the second cycle, codes were merged and grouped, which resulted in a 16 principal code. Codes were also linked together to create a network. These 16 codes produced 5 major themes regarding effective leadership style for conflict management in healthcare. Findings of this study shows that to effectively handle conflict, it is very important to understand the variety of its causes. Sometimes the confusion and lack of clarity on roles and responsibility is a common issue for health professionals because the healthcare environment is unpredictable and complex. Study also found that conflicts were more about the people than problem. So conflict is usually a symptom of an underlying problem and not just a problem itself. For example, it can be a symptom of ineffective communication and a bad leadership. That's why effective leadership by healthcare professionals is essential in modern healthcare settings. Among many other skills, conflict management skill is crucial for healthcare leaders because failure to assess and manage conflict can result in negative implications for patient care. The study found that effective conflict management depended on creativity and problem-solving skills of the leader. So conflict research and theory favors the dual concern model to develop strategies. The model proposed 5 strategies along with appropriate conflict management styles. Traditionally, organizational conflicts were perceived as dysfunctional and promoting frustration, stress, and anxiety. However, managers and leaders have recently begun to acknowledge the positive consequences of conflicts, such as serving as a catalyst of a change, organizational learning, and promoting innovations. This dissertation sought to find an effective leadership style that could fit well with the conflict management style to resolve conflicts in healthcare. After reviewing the scholarly literature and exploring several leadership styles, 3 leadership styles were explored, but situational leadership was suggested here as one of the best styles for effective conflict management, because the situational leadership style can guide leaders to understand the exact cause of a conflict and provide the best approach to handle conflict based on any situation. There are few recommendations based on the findings and which suggest that the first steps involved in conflict management is the conflict recognition, which involves identifying the conflict and causes, meaning an accurate diagnosis of the issue. Leadership styles and strategies will not be effective without a proper diagnosis of the conflict. It is also recommended that leaders must have strong communication skills. That includes being good listeners. Both parties typically think they are correct during the conflict, and both parties have their side of the story. The leaders can only diagnose the issue if they know both perspectives of the story, so it is important that the leader must be unbiased in these situations to act as a mediator. It is highly recommended that leaders must understand that one conflict management style might be more appropriate than another style depending on any situation. The presence of a tension or conflict is an essential component of a successful organizational learning. However, it must be recognized that organizational learning strengthens decision making, otherwise, it could lead to a chaos. Training of leaders regarding how to choose an effective conflict management style is recommended because conflict management is a skill that can be taught and developed, and leaders can be trained to identify which style can be used according to the situation. This dissertation was limited to the past 10 years of scholarships only. However, there might be additional relevant studies beyond that period that could be helpful to explore. Findings from this dissertation can be used in general management practices, but mainly the literature reviewed belongs to the healthcare professionals only. Future research may be conducted to investigate how leaders can use communication and the role of emotional intelligence in conflict management. There are some studies on non-clinical leaderships, but mostly the studies were on a clinical leaders, how they handle conflicts. So there is a dire need of studying more non-clinical leaders in healthcare and their role in conflict management. The future research can also be conducted on how to teach conflict management and the role of HR to include conflict management in their training programs and policy makings. There is also a need to explore the effects of demographic changes and organizational culture on conflict management. In conclusion, conflicts are where two or more people interact. The leader's effective conflict management style, communication, and emotional awareness will determine whether the outcome is productive or destructive. So, the influential leaders should be taught and trained to lead change, development, and transformation in their organization. At last, leaders must recognize that conflict can cause adverse responses within their team or organizations. However, suppose they can draw on their leadership skills and recognize which conflict handling style is required for each situation. In that case, they can create an opportunity to improve team structure and dynamics and ultimately develop and transform their organization. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.